First week of meta is here for Mythic Plus. For melee DPS at the very least, people are blasting left and right. Some didn't get their tier set yet still every spec is doing a plus 20. Now, if every spec is doing a plus 20, how will they be ranked in a tier list? Let's first talk about the first spec on the list, arms, and as we go through this video and this ranking in general, I'm gonna give a little bit of a context and feedback as to how I have come to rank these specs based on what they're doing, because of course the data is incomplete. So first of all, we're gonna put arms into A tier, and this is a good opportunity to talk a little bit about arms. Pretty much 90%, if not 100% of the arms players that are pushing the highest of keys don't really have the new tier set. Most people don't have the new tier set. Some of them might have 2-piece, so it's very hard to kind of judge their overall performance. But with this being said, throughout this video, you'll also see that every spec is clearing 20s or at least a 19. So specs are actually going there, and because this is actually happening 2 days after the patch has been released, kind of probably puts the meta in a good state. There are obviously outliers, and we're going to talk about that as well. Now, arms is still pretty solid. You're actually not playing Bladestorm, surprisingly enough, or maybe not surprisingly if you have been playing arms for a little while, but just collateral damage. The AoE burst is still crazy. You're still going to be suffering a little bit on single target, but seeing as how this week is mostly fortified, maybe that's not that big of a issue when it comes to arms. Assassination, though, as we kind of predicted, is also really good. Still most likely without the tier set yet, so we're gonna wait. But Assassination is part of the rework gang that has hit 10.2, and the caustic splatter talent is amazing. It's doing high damage, don't get me wrong. Assassination is doing good damage. It's not topping all of the meters, but it's good enough to clear 20s easy. And caustic splatter is probably one of the best things that it could have gone for Mythic Plus, since it does funnel damage. Obviously, it splatters into all the other mobs, but Assassination will probably be one of the best specs to kind of funnel down that one high target. And considering that we have Sanguine, and pretty much no two mobs have the same amount of HP, you kind of want to kill the highest HP or focus the highest HP mob first. And with the way that Assassination plays, is looking like it's gonna do really well. I'm seeing Assassinations play Sudden Demise, which is one of the new talents that seems really cool, but it doesn't seem to do a lot of damage. But still, with all things said and done, Assassination is one of the better melees out there. A big increase from the prior bottom of the tier list years in a row that we've had, and we're gonna constantly go look into the other rogues after actually you look at our Patreon page. Haha, segue. Listen, these types of videos are definitely sponsored by our Patreons, and if you like to see the content that we do and do a little bit more, and maybe even support us a little bit, because I don't know, maybe you like the content that we do, consider checking the Patreon page down below. You'll of course help your boys make more content and also gain access to some exclusive perks that are only available to Patreons, like early access videos, blooper videos and such, customizable wallpapers with your character. We've been through this before, you kind of know. We would be super grateful if you did at least take a look. You don't really have to do anything, because maybe it's not for you, but if it is, you never know until you click. Now, I'm gonna go back to Outlaw, which if you have been playing any amount of World of Warcraft in the past couple of days, you know that if I put Outlaw here, you're gonna be like, that kind of makes sense, yeah. But Outlaw is actually strong. Looking at the overall, because you know you're probably seeing a lot of damage profiles on screen right now from some of the keys. I specifically looked at Throne of the Tides for all of the specs that we're going to be ranking today, because it is considered the hardest dungeon in the game. And if you can clear that hard dungeon with a decent amount of performance, I consider the spec to be viable. And it is for all of them, especially for Outlaw as well, which is doing quite high amounts of damage. Now, in terms of its damage profile, it's kind of the same as always, in the sense that it's very consistent. You can do very good AoE damage, you can do very good single target damage, which is something that we can probably say for one or two more specs on this list, while the others have just specialized damage profiles, either for bosses or for trash and things like that. But Outlaw is just good to have whenever. And that's probably part of the reason why it's here, also because it's just doing a lot of damage. We kind of know that Outlaw's kind of cracked. Now we're going to see how this plays out in the next couple of weeks, especially on Tyrannical, and especially after everybody else has gotten their 4 set. Speaking of 4 sets, Survival is also in an interesting space, because with the new tier set, it's supposed to do really good in Mythic Plus. Right now, it's still doing really good. I mean, it is clearing in the 19s and 20s range, but it's a little bit behind everybody else. Not by a lot, but enough for not every spec to be A or S tier, because otherwise that tier list would just be boring. It's doing okay. It's not currently turning any heads, but then again, you know, people don't really have their 4 set yet, and it's still just survival. It kind of does the same thing that it always has been doing. You're a melee hunter, so maybe the benefits of survival is just having a shorter kick, which is actually very useful in definitely a couple of the dungeons out there. And, you know, you'll always have access to all the hunter kit, the bloodlusts, the immunes, the traps, all that stuff, which is always going to come in handy in Mythic Plus. Enhancement is still rocking it. I mean, you know, we're kind of looking at a similar situation as last season, because not everybody has their tier set, but it's good to see that they're still dishing out the big damage. Considering that Enhancement did get a little change in the talents, not too much, but you're probably still gonna be playing Elemental Blast and Frost Shock Hellstorm in Mythic Plus, which is definitely trucking all the damage profile. This is kind of like Outlaw. I kind of want to say that maybe it does probably a little bit higher damage in some of the keys than Outlaw. Maybe it's just probably better with the old set than Outlaw. I mean, prior to this season, Enhancement was definitely outperforming Outlaw, but now Outlaw kind of caught up a little bit, but they're very close. They're kind of neck and neck, so it's, you know, they're going to be in test here, and that's that, okay? You just have to deal with it. Now, for Feral Druid, similar situation to Survival. Feral Druid is going to get a really kicker tier set, and even without that tier set, is still doing relatively high in the 19s, 20s. Some of the top ferals kind of, well, I mean, that's probably true for all specs. They're kind of failing some of the 20s, but it is just 2 days, 3 days, depending on when you watch this. It's been recorded a day before it's been released, but it's like still pushing 20s this early. It is really good, and it doesn't feel like feral is holding back their party. Even though the damage is really good, it's probably not gonna top some of the range casters, which might have a video on it in a little while. Frost DK is surprisingly way better than more specs than I gave it credit for. It's actually into A tier. Of course, once again, with the disclaimer that we mostly looked at the Throne of the Tides dungeon, since that is the hardest one. Likely, some of these specs do way better and way worse in some of the easier dungeons. But if you really want to know if a spec has what it takes, it has the chops, Throne of the Tides is probably where you're going to be looking at. And Frost DK definitely delivers. It delivers that sweet obliteration goodness, up until it might get its Chill Streak tier set, which is still yet to come for most, if not all, of the top Frost DKs pushing the keys as of this moment. But considering that a bunch of people have 2 sets and 1 or 2 have 4 set already, it's likely by the end of the week that everybody will have, at least the top key pushers will have their forces. So things will be looking different then. Until then, Fury is definitely going to be into A tier. Now, it's doing a little bit better than Arms and Frost DK, but not by too much. Fury is just very consistent. It's kind of like a weaker version of Outlaw. You're doing really well no matter what, probably because the way its AoE damage profile and its single damage profile works is similar to Outlaw, where you just pop Whirlwind to just do your single target and hit an AoE. That's kind of what Fury does. You're actually, you know, still a warrior, very tanky. Although it applies to Arms as well, as a warrior, especially as Fury, you do have the option to kind of sack a little bit of damage and get a little bit more CC. You can take stuff like Shockwave or Intimidating Shout or things like that, which is really good. For Shockwave particularly, you probably need to sack a little bit of Thunderous Roar damage, the cooldown reduction talent or the extra bleed damage or whatever, one of the two, probably the extra damage maybe. But you definitely have that option, and it's actually really good to have more crowd control. Considering that it's a fortified week, you probably want to pull a little bit more, but then again, stun and sanguine kind of sucks. So we do have a spec coming up next, and I have to be honest with you, I thought Outlaw was bullshit, but this one really takes the cake. God damn it, I kind of wanted to have Havoc in S tier all by its lonesome, but it's only doing like 21s and 22s, like 1 or 2 keys higher than everybody else. It didn't really feel like it should belong in a tier in of itself, because it's probably going to get nerfed. I don't see this staying. Listen, even if it does get nerfed, Havoc is just giga good. The damage profile, the talent variety doesn't seem to be very high, because there is And I think we have a screenshot right now with one Havoc that actually has the 4 set. This is the only person that I've been able to see have the 4 set in pushing the highest of keys. I've looked at the top players pushing keys in the Throne of Tides. This is the only one I've seen with 4 set, and you can probably see the difference between not having 4 set and just doing properly with the last tier build with Essence Brick and stuff like that, and having the 4 set and actually swapping Essence Breath for Fell Barrage for a little bit more AoE damage. It is nuts, the difference, and you can probably expect this from everybody else as well. But if you take away the 4 set, Havoc just looks very similar to Outlaw and Enhancement in terms of overall performance. Sure, you have Darkness, you have some really good utility, and you're a lot tankier this season, which says a lot more about Havoc, considering that Enhancement is definitely the squishiest S tier spec here. So things are looking very good for Havoc, even if nerfs are coming. Don't bring your pitchforks. I didn't call it out. You've seen the damage meters, man. Ret is in a similar situation as Outlaw in the sense that it is just very, very solid. Possibly the tankiest DPS in the game, period. And obviously brings all the Paladin goodness. It's probably the best Paladin spec to bring in Mythic Plus if you're going to be pushing keys. Surprisingly enough, I have seen almost 0 Holy Paladins and Prot Paladins. I mean, there's still one, like, you know, scattered around here and there. But likely, if you want any Paladin utility, you're probably going to get a Ret first because his damage is still really, really, really good. Considering that it's using its old tier set, which is kind of poop, while here, just you wait until you get the new tier set, okay? Things are going to change a little bit, but you cannot really go wrong with Ret. It just provides some of the utility that you don't really find in any other classes through Blessing of Protection and Freedom. That just, oh my god, it's so good to get rid of some of these debuffs and mechanics. It's unreal. Subtlety Rogue is kind of in a probably expected spot. At the beginning of each season, Subtlety seems to struggle a little bit, and I'm saying struggle as I play Subtlety Rogue into A tier, which is probably not making my case for me, but Subtlety Rogue is probably the most interesting rogue spec in this moment, in this day and age, because it has had some of the most build variety I've seen in all of these specs. You can play stuff like the Rotten and just have a little bit more boss damage, or play Dark Brew and just explode in AoE, or at least this is what that does to people's DPS performance while they're doing still 19s and 20s and things like that. So it's looking pretty good. I did actually expect to see more Gormaw's bite, but maybe we'll probably see that more on Tyrannical. Until then, Subtlety is again very solid. It's a little bit more specialized. Like I mentioned, not all specs are just consistent across the board. It's a little bit more specialized, but once it specializes, man, does it bring down the hammer, and still no new 4 set. Unholy is, listen, Marcelian is playing Unholy, and he's doing all right, okay? He's doing quite a bit of damage, actually. So, and compared to everybody else at the beginning of the season, Unholy's kind of here. It's good. It's doing 19s, it's doing 20s. It's still playing the same build, probably because nothing really changed for Unholy outside of the new tier set, which is probably still not going to change much in terms of the disease, plague, ebon, fever playstyle, which you may like or may not like. Now, also with a little bit of a caveat, considering this is a Sanguine week, it's probably more difficult for Unholy to be consistent throughout the entire life cycle of a pack, since you're probably gonna big time burst at the beginning of a pack, which is really, really good, but once they start dying, you cannot consistently keep up your death and decay efficiently on everybody unless the tank just really pulls around you, which that's fine, but not everybody does that, and if you don't really have that, you probably will see some dip in performance when it comes to Unholy. Until then, Unholy's looking pretty strong, and hey, even if it was, I think, at the bottom of the tier when it comes to melee, either in our predictions or just the meta-analysis of the last season, considering that it's keeping up with everybody else, it's doing pretty good. Not so much about Windwalker. For the first time ever, although with a little bit of a caveat, listen, this is just 2 to 3 days after the season has launched. Not everybody has the new gear. We didn't even touch Tyrannical yet, but Windwalker's at the bottom of the tier. It's, yeah, and still that's in B tier. I did really consider putting specs into C and D tier just to kind of spread them out a little bit in terms of overall performance. We could have had Windwalker and maybe Feral into D tier as some of the lowest performance, but considering that they're still doing 19s and 20s, and that's kind of like a key below the S tier, I mean, I think this is only fair to have them here. It's overall just okay. The only issue I have with Windwalkers, just by looking at the top players, the performance seems to like oscillate all over the place between surprisingly good single target damage on bosses. Well, what even is that? And, you know, decent AoE, especially if you play the Touch of Death talents, which you're probably still going to be playing because they're just really good for like a one-button press. Windwalkers definitely need of a little bit of love. We'll see if the new tier set saves it. I mean, it's the new tier set. It's going to be a little bit more damage, but so does everybody else get a little bit more damage. Still, looking at all of these logs for some of the top DPSs in the game, I haven't really seen any other monk spec. So I can make the same argument as I did for Ret. Windwalker is looking like it's probably going to be the best monk spec, at least at the beginning of the season. And that's probably not saying much for Brewmaster and the Mistweaver, but hey, this is at least in Mythic Plus. And still at the beginning of the 10.2 season. And if you want to know everything that comes with 10.2, not just the Mythic Plus, but in all aspects of the game, we have a video out that goes over into all of the activities, all the reputations, all of the content that you'd need to know about when it comes to 10.2, so you can just hop on right now and play one of these marvelous specs that they seem to be all doing really well.